more likely that a woman, when she negotiates compared to a man, is going to be seen as being difficult, that people don't want to work with her because she's too aggressive. She's displaying all this counter-normative behavior. Like you said, that
Right.
becomes problematic.
Like, I think one very common non-promotable task for women is like the designated note taker at meetings. Like, you're the person doing the emotional labor of basically, being an administrative assistant in addition to the job that you're expected to do. Can you give us examples of other non-promotable tasks or tasks that you've seen women consistently get assigned with very little benefit to their career?
Absolutely. So you're right that note takers is the, prototypical one, but there's also all the work that involves, say, orienting new employees, helping other people with their work, filling in for people while they're away, resolving workplace conflicts, which happen behind the scenes that women typically do, serving on industry or organization-wide task forces that then won't be recognized. Often DEI initiatives are non-promotable tasks. Last year there was a study by McKinsey and Lean In, and what they found, they interviewed employers, and what they found is that 70% of employers said that DEI initiatives were critical for the functioning of their organizations. But only 24% said they actually rewarded the people who did these initiatives. And as you can imagine,
unfortunately, that sounds about right.
Exactly. And you can imagine who is doing these initiatives. Of course, women and people of color.
Right.
And they're deemed important but not rewarded. So those are some of the kinds of activities that are non-promotable. And, you might think, well, so you're doing this small thing or this small thing. But as we see in our book, a ton of feathers still weighs a ton. That is, a ton of these small tasks add up to really being a drag on women's careers.
And I think it's a larger, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or add to it, I think it's a larger societal issue is that we just don't reward this work. We don't think it's valuable work. So, women are largely, in jobs of caretaking, right? So teacher, nurse, whatever these jobs are, and then they are penalized for it or like not paid market rates because it's like, oh, it's a caretaking job and it's largely done by women. So it's like this cyclical thing. And I think with something like, the emotional labor or trying to like understand how different colleagues can work together, like that's not something you can put in an Excel spreadsheet and be like, this person brought in X amount of money, right? But really the organization falls apart unless you have somebody who's doing that kind of work. So is that part of it too? Is that we're not seeing the actual like monetary value of the work and therefore we don't think it's promotable?
Yeah, you make two really interesting points. The first is at a kind of systematic level in terms of the economic structure. And that is that certain kinds of work, because women do it, is undervalued in terms of occupations. So, for example, teaching used to be...
You said what I was trying to say very eloquently. Thank you. Yeah.
Teaching used to be a really incredibly prestigious occupation when it was, and paid well, when it was conducted, when men were teachers. And as women flowed into the teaching profession, it became devalued, and it's because women were in it. So that's kind of at the macro level. Within an organization, you're absolutely right. This work that we call non-promotable is done behind the scenes. It's typically invisible. You're right. It doesn't show up on a spreadsheet because often people don't know that you did it. If you are resolving a conflict or if you're helping someone with their work, that isn't going to show up. And it is important work. The organization would not prosper if people didn't do these things. But the women who are doing these are not rewarded for that work.
So is the answer, fuck all non-promotable tasks and we're just not going to do them? Like, is that the answer?
Well, organizations would have a real problem if people stopped doing this work. And so that's clearly not the answer, but you really hit on something extremely important. And that is, this is a difficult problem for women to solve on their own. Because if if I just say, hey, Tori, just start saying no to all this non-promotable work. First of all, the organization isn't going to do well because you're not doing it anymore. And secondly, people are going to say nasty things about you because you're not a team player, or, other words I probably don't want to say on your podcast.
I mean, she's a bitch, right? That's
Thank
probably
you. That's
the big
exactly
one,
right.
Yeah. She's being difficult. She's difficult. She's not great to get along with.
We've all heard these words, and they're words that are really reserved to describe women who aren't helpful, kind, and other oriented. So you can see that those things are problematic then. So what is the answer? And we believe the answer is that our organizations need to change. And fortunately, this isn't rocket science. It is easy to change the way work is allocated. If you are taking notes in a meeting this week, someone else takes it next week. Let's draw names out of a hat to see who does it this week. Set up a schedule to assign this work so that it's more equitable, because it needs to get done. It's important work, but it's not fair to disproportionately burden some groups with this work.
Yeah. I think back my last job before I became a full-time entrepreneur, one of my good friends at that job was hired as a software engineer, but she had trained as a therapist before. And she was like this beautiful hybrid of, now working a tech job, but having all of these skills to mediate conflict. And it was a startup, so there was a lot of egos. And so the really beautiful thing is actually she was compensated for both of those things. She was compensated for the actual work she was doing as a software engineer. And then part of, her compensation and part of why the team knew she was so valuable was the fact that she was there mediating conflicts and figuring out, how do we get this person to talk to this person in a way that connects. So it was really, really interesting. And it actually like such a breath of fresh air of not only realizing that this woman's skills were so far beyond tech and that was valuable, but also rewarding her for those skills.
That's a really rare story. It's not kind of the stories that we've been hearing from women about how this work goes really unrewarded and how problematic it is. And so it's quite amazing that this company, it's quite amazing that this company really realized that this was a valuable skill and found a way to reward her with it. And so,
yeah, I definitely know it's not common, but even looking at it, I was like, this is lovely. This is how it should be.
Exactly.
So one of the things that you talk about,
I was going to say,
go ahead.
It's more often taken for granted that, well, you have these skills and you're going to use them, but that's sort of an extra. It's not really what we do here. And so it gets discounted.
Yeah. So one of the things you touched on earlier that I would love to explore some more, I'm a negotiation coach. I teach women how to negotiate. However, even if, a woman can waltz into a negotiation and be completely prepared, she can still hear the word no, right? And I think this is, again, why, society needs to be more comfortable with women asking for what they're worth, as well as organizations. But what are you seeing in addition to that? Like, what sort of narratives or perspectives happen that penalize women when they do negotiate? Like, I think of the one like, oh, she's not grateful for the opportunity. Like, what sort of those narratives are do you see commonly in your work when a woman does actually, have the tools she needs to negotiate?
It's more likely that a woman, when she negotiates compared to a man, is going to be seen as being difficult, that people don't want to work with her because she's too aggressive. She's displaying all this counter-normative behavior. Like you said, that becomes problematic. But I think even more, it may be the case that women just don't get what they're asking for. That is, it seems wrong for women to be negotiating. And so people just take a harder line against them, and it makes them harder. It makes it harder for women to negotiate for increases in pay, for promotions, for different work assignments, for other factors that may be really important that men are getting and being allowed to negotiate for. So that's the kind of the other factor that we see is she might get penalized socially and it within the network, but also instrumentally not getting what she's negotiating for.
Many people argue that part of the wage gap is that women aren't aggressive in negotiations or aren't aggressive enough. Is there any truth to that?
Well, certainly, I've written about that in my book, Women Don't Ask. And I think it is responsible for some of the wage gap. I think that is starting to change. I think there's more attention in the media about the importance of negotiating. Just in the last couple of days, I've done multiple interviews with media outlets about negotiating, and now is a good time to negotiate. So I think there's a lot of attention to that. I think the biggest factor that we're seeing right now in terms of barriers to women's advancement is this one that's been hiding in plain sight, and that is how men and women are spending their time at work. And this issue about how women are getting tasked with these assignments that aren't going to help them succeed. We can fix negotiation processes, we can fix hiring, we can fix evaluation, but if ultimately the things that matters most is what you're doing day to day to day on your job and what output you're producing, men and women aren't in the same race because women are carrying around this heavy load of non-promotable work that's holding them back.
Right.
And so we could design a lot of procedures around evaluation, but if the fundamental truth on the ground doesn't change about this issue of how people are spending their time, we're not going to solve the problems of inequity in the workplace, no matter how hard we try.